Yeah, man. This one's been a long time coming. This one has been a long time coming. Frenkie de Jong. Frenkie de Jong, man. Big up to him. Big up to him because in the last, I would say, more so in the last couple of seasons, obviously, since Hansi Flick has obviously come in, since last season. He started off this season, of course, really, really well. But let's say I'll give it the last 3 seasons, right? I finally looked at Frenkie de Jong and I'm finally giving him the respect and credit that I never gave him before. I won't lie. Those who know, like if you ask me about Frenkie de Jong, big up Enz because I know that's Enz's guy and he has been championing, you know, Frenkie de Jong for a long time. Always wanted him, wanted Liverpool to sign him, thought that would be the midfielder. And I'll be real, Enz, you were right. I'm here to admit that I was wrong about Frenkie. It took time. It took time. It took a long, long time, in my opinion, anyway, since signing for Barcelona and everything like that. But he has reached this stage now where I look at him, and I'll be honest, I don't call many people world class. I probably would throw him in there as like you just made the world class kind of status from what I've seen anyway over the last kind of like 3 years, to be honest with you. If we're counting, let's say, last season and maybe a couple seasons before that, now I'm like, okay, you've shown me that you bring something to this team, but you bring something that it's very difficult to really quantify. If I'm being 100% honest, it's not something that you can look at straight away and be like, oh yeah, you can, do this, that, and the third. And listen, man, I have to big him up. I have to give him his flowers. Obviously, everyone's been talking about, him and Pedri, and obviously Pedri's been getting his flowers and stuff like that, which is, of course, rightly so because of, the type of player that he is. So, yeah, man, big up to him. And look, Barcelona have now decided, hey, look, yeah, I mean, they want to renew his contract on a salary reduction, but the player wants to stay, and Barcelona really want to extend that deal. I believe he's about 28 years old, which is crazy because he doesn't look it. He looks actually younger than that. He actually looks the exact same as he did when he joined Barcelona, maybe a bit filled out a little bit more, I would probably say. But listen, I like there's not much else I can realistically say about him, as an individual. Absolutely brilliant midfielder. Like he just oozes this level of class in the middle of the park. And I think it just took me time to really appreciate, if I'm being honest, because I watch Pedri, and me, I'm a Spanish lover. I love the Spanish football. I love the players. The type of football that they kind of play, the Barcelona way. That's my favorite style of football. And in my opinion, it took Frenkie de Jong a minute to really hit those kind of heights. I will be honest with you. I didn't feel that he was. I don't want to say at that level, but I just thought he was. The ones where you just think, yeah, this is another midfielder. Do you know what I mean? Like he's another one. Yeah, he can do a job here and there, and you're not going to complain, so to speak. But if I can go out there and potentially sign another midfielder, then I would probably prefer to do so. But in the middle of the park with him and Pedri, I'm telling you now, that's the best. I don't know what you want to realistically call them, because if you look at his heat map, you can just see it just below myself here. It's weird to call him like a double pivot player, but I guess that's what they would be deemed as in today's football. Or I just call them two central midfielders because they both operate in so many different areas. You can see Frenkie de Jong is further up the pitch, in that kind of left 8 position, right 8 position, and then of course in those deeper areas alongside Pedri. But these two are the two best combinations that I know of in world football right now. I can't think of 2 players in your midfield who are better than this in terms of a partnership. And it's very difficult to have partnerships. It's very difficult to have partnerships in midfield because most midfields are like a midfield 3, right? And I think also I'm coming, especially from this era of midfield 3s being the one, the Xavis, Iniesta, Busquets, Casemiro, Modric. Who else is in there? Casemiro, Modric, Toni Kroos. I'm more looking at those, even the Liverpool one, Wijnaldum, Fabinho, Jordan Henderson, and whoever else you might want to potentially throw into the mix. But even Manchester City was a little bit of a trio, but I guess Kevin De Bruyne, Rodri kind of took the limelight with that. But that's the kind of era I'm looking at. And I feel like most teams, if I go back to Juventus, we all remember Pirlo, Vidal, Pogba. These are the kind of trios that we're looking at, and we're thinking, okay, this is what people are trying to take on board. and this is what people are trying to do, and this is how football is going to necessarily be played. But now we're seeing more double pivots. We're seeing, central midfielders, just two in the middle kind of thing, and that's what we're seeing with Barcelona, and especially with the way that Barcelona play, high line, high risk, high reward, and all of that kind of stuff under Hansi Flick. You can see, yeah, this partnership. I just, if you're talking, obviously, if you're talking, we saw them against Newcastle, right? And we saw that, Frenkie de Jong, what he was doing against Newcastle. This is 87 passes attempted, 86 completed. Only one pass in 8 out of 87. That's a lot. I know I've seen some, and big up Curtis Jones, because he's actually someone I think who would look at home in a Barcelona midfield because of the way he can keep the, that'd be really good to see. But he's someone who can keep the ball in that midfield, keep possession, keep things ticking over. Ultimately, he's not really doing that he's doing that for Liverpool, but the way he wants to play and the way Liverpool play, I think, is not really a match at this current moment in time, right? But when I'm looking at this, and I'm like, 87 passes attempted, so you got a 99% success rate, and we're not talking 99% and you've only made like 40 passes. Do you know what I'm saying? Because that's usually what I see when I see some people, have that kind of high success rate. Unless it's really Curtis Jones, most of them is like, yeah, you played about 30 to 40 passes and you got about 90%, which is good, listen, 90% is better than it not being 90%. But ultimately, you didn't play that many passes. He was doing that. And they weren't just passes for passing's sake. These were 1-2s, give and goes. Him and Pedri, like, they were just moving the Newcastle midfield around, and it was just ridiculous. And then again, I'm watching him in other games, and it's that relationship. And listen, look, you need to build a relationship with the player, and it took him time. Like I said, he wasn't like this when he first came. There was rumors, about him, potentially leaving. I remember, coming from Ajax, he was a player that I looked at and said, in that Ajax team, that was a really good team. You guys can obviously see it here. You can see Donny van den Beek, remember him, obviously going to Manchester United kind of ruined his career really and truly. But De Jong almost playing as like a centre back, dropping into the midfield, helping out alongside Shone there, in that kind of pivot role that he's obviously in. They were kind of using a 3 at the back or 5 at the back, and obviously you got your wing backs in Tagliafico and Veltman there as well, Ziyech, Neres, Tadic. That was a good team. That team got to the semi-final of the Champions League. I think they beat Real Madrid along the way, just losing out to Tottenham. That was a fantastic team, and he's obviously from that. And Ajax and Barcelona are very similar in terms of the way that they play football. So I thought when Barcelona signed him, and they signed him for some big money, I thought, you know what, this should work. That was my thinking anyway. I thought, yeah, this should be something that should just be, if I'm being honest, relatively seamless. I don't feel like this is going to be something that, it shouldn't take him too long to, to get accustomed to the way of Barcelona play, because you play the similar football. Johan Cruyff, you know what I'm saying? Johan Cruyff, Ajax, over to, to Barcelona. So I just kind of looked at it in that kind of way. And again, looking at his style of play and the type of play that he is, says here, characterized by his composure on the ball, exceptional passing ability, and ability to break opposition lines with his dribbling, became a defining feature of Ajax's approach. Very similar again to Barcelona. He often acted as a deep line playmaker, dictating the tempo of the game and orchestrating attacks from a deeper position. You guys know that kind of last sentence there. He often acted as a deep line playmaker, dictating the tempo of the game and orchestrating attacks from a deeper position. That is my midfielder. When I talk about the midfield and I talk about the type of players that I would love to see in my team and, for Liverpool, that right there. So obviously I would love a Pedri, I would love a Vitinha, I would love a Fabian Ruiz, I would love all these kind of, I would love a De Jong, I would love all of these kind of players, right? But that's what I'm looking for in my midfielder, because you can see what that does to a team. Now, I'm not saying that you can't beat that team. I'm not saying that it's unbeatable, but it's as close as you can possibly get. As we've seen with PSG last season, even with Barcelona last season, you're seeing it at the beginning of this season as well. But also, I believe that's the way that football's going. Heck, I'll be real. When I'm looking at even Liverpool, they're trying with the 2 in the midfield as well. Now, they're doing it in a different kind of way because they don't have a player who can dictate the tempo of a game and orchestrate attacks from a deeper position. Fair enough. They're trying to do it with a bit, a bit more hustle and bustle. Do you know what I mean? Like you have your player who can, in Gravenberg, who's really good at kind of getting the ball out of there, but he's not a De Jong on the ball, you know, unfortunately. He's not a Pedri, he's not a Joao Neves, he's not a Fabian Ruiz, he's not a Vitinha, he's not this type of player. He's more of a runner. Maybe he would do well alongside one of these other players, potentially, or even in a three, alongside two of those kind of players. Then you can have a Gravenberch. But where you've got him, I almost feel like if you don't play Curtis Jones next to him, then you've got Szoboszlai. Szoboszlai is definitely not this kind of guy. So if he's not that kind of guy, yeah, it just looks different. That's all. Now, I'm not saying, again, Liverpool went out, won the league, blah, blah, blah. But when I'm talking about midfielders and I'm talking about this is what I want to see, because I want to have that ultimate control. I don't care if you think it's boring. I don't care if you think it's whatever. That's what I want to see, because I can see that that style of football is a lot more sustainable. If you've got the right players, obviously. If you don't, then of course it just looks like what it looks like, right? But when you've got those kind of players, this is the kind of football that, you know, you kind of see. But like I keep saying, De Jong wasn't like this beforehand. Do you know what I mean? He really was not like this. Like when he came to Barcelona, like, was it 2000, I think it was 19 or something like that, you know, when he came all those years ago, you didn't really, like, they didn't really give him a role. It was almost like, yeah, you're the midfielder, but sometimes you're going to play as in a pivot, sometimes you're going to play in a deeper role, sometimes you're going to play as a central midfielder, sometimes you're going to play here, but then your role is constantly changing. They had Ronald Koeman, Xavi, now obviously Hansi Flick, you know, too many managers, too many different styles. When he first joined, it was all really about the defensive side of his game. And I felt like that you were taking away from what you originally signed him for, which always bugs me with managers and players. You sign a player for doing what they did, but then you go and get them doing something else. And but you get them doing something else that, not even to say he can't do that, but you're getting him to do something that is like, that's not the strength. That's not his main strength. His main strength, as it said there, is orchestrating attacks, dictating the tempo. That's what he's good at. So why not get him to do that? Unfortunately, Barcelona didn't really do that. Ronald Koeman, even he kind of tried to play, you know, Frenkie de Jong a little bit further forward, you know, almost I don't want to say an attacking midfielder, but a real box to box 8, right? And again, I thought, you're kind of wasting his talents there. And again, this is why I never really rated him before, because I said, I'm not seeing it with him at the moment. Do you know what I mean? Like, and obviously I thought it was going to be seamless, you going into that Barcelona team. But right now, it's not really looking seamless. And if I'm being honest, you just look like you don't have a place in the team in terms of it, you know, that whatever midfielder they're looking for, you're not doing that job well enough. And as I said before, there were those rumors that he was going to go to Manchester United. He was on this big contract. And remember, Barcelona, financial issues and all of this kind of stuff. So you thought, is he going to leave? Is he going to, you know, there was so much kind of going on, you know, surrounding him as well. I thought he was going to leave. And listen, just like Rafinha, because Rafinha shut me up last season, just like him, I was at the beginning of maybe last season, if you'd have told me that Barcelona were going to sell Rafinha and De Jong, I wouldn't have been mad, which is crazy, right? Because now look at them. And listen, like I said, I've got to hold my hands up, because they just, under Hansi Flick, he just found the right kind of connection, the right tactics and everything for them to be able to thrive. And they were two of, you know, some of the best players in Europe last season, especially Rafinha. But, you know, Frenkie de Jong, so underrated alongside Pedri. Like I said, Pedri will get the headlines because, you know, it is Pedri, right? But yeah, Frenkie de Jong was really doing his stuff last season, man. I have to give him, you know, his plaudits. And this season, again, he started off really, really well. But yeah, you know, Xavi coming in as well, especially even then, it was a bit like, yeah, you look good in some games, but you know, Xavi ball was a little bit, it was good for one season, it weren't so great for another season, I'll be honest. It just didn't really work. It wasn't really that sustainable. Like I said, it worked for the one season, they won the league, but then the following season, it was just kind of curtains, if I'm being, you know, totally honest. But yeah, Frenkie de Jong, like I said, like, I have to give him his plaudits because he really turned it around, and I think he's an absolutely top midfielder. You know, when you're looking at like his style of play and where he wants to pick up the ball and the things that he wants to kind of do, you know, this is what he was really good at. You know, picking up that ball there, you can see obviously Messi's on the run. This is when, you know, Messi was obviously still there. Boom, wants to get that ball into someone like Messi. But these are the areas that he was kind of picking up. It was, like I said, that kind of right-sided 8. You know, and he was playing further forward because they still had Busquets. Gavi was obviously coming through as well. So it was like, okay, you can play in those positions and play a bit further forward, you know, do your business a bit further forward. But then you start to drop a little bit deeper every now and again, you know, and it's like rotations within the midfield. And I just felt now he doesn't really have that rotation in the midfield because they've got their kind of number 10, whether it be Danny Olmo, whether it be Fermin Lopez, they play in those forward areas. You and Pedri can occupy that midfield, and they seem to occupy it so calm. And sometimes I sit there and, I'm looking at the game against Newcastle again, and I'm like, they're occupying in those areas in the midfield, but it's only two of them, 2 against 3, 2 against 4 sometimes. And they just bopping it around. Obviously, Barcelona have fantastic, probably some of the best movement in Europe alongside PSG, but it's those two against whoever else, and you can't get the ball of them. God forbid you enter into a rondo, it will get long. It will get absolutely, long and embarrassing. And I just think that now he's finally found like his role, his position. I just think that now we should hopefully start seeing that he's now going to, as I like to say, he's going to he's going to get in his bag. He's really, really going to get in his bag. He's really going to start showing everybody like, nah, I'm one of the best midfielders in the world. You need to respect me. Do you get what I'm saying? I know the Ballon d'Or didn't respect him, didn't put him in that 30 list like that. But yeah, I think, when we're looking at it now, I can't think of many midfielders better than him, in my opinion, in terms of how I look at midfielders, their roles for their teams and stuff like that. Obviously, you got players who are defensive midfielders who do the tackling and stuff better than he does. Fair enough, intercept really, really well, but he can intercept pretty decently. But I think he's one of those. Again, it's just I'm biased, so it's that preference of being able to be a ball playing defender slash midfielder. Someone who can really get on the ball and dictate the tempo of things. Like I said, man, Frenkie de Jong is definitely the guy, and yeah, man, it's just really to big him up, to be honest with you. But I would love to know what you guys think about Frenkie de Jong. Like, how highly do you rate him in like a list of midfielders? Where's he kind of ranked? Is he underrated a little bit? Especially now, because I would say now he probably does enter into that world-class kind of bracket potentially. And if he doesn't, I'm not going to argue with you. If you think, nah, maybe just not yet. But I think he's in that era, he's in that kind of phase now where it usually happens with some midfielders where you've been around. I think I said this about Kylian Mbappe as well when I did that video, is that sometimes, yeah, when you've been around for so long, we almost forget. Like I said, he's like 28 or something. I'm sure he's roughly about that, if not maybe a little bit younger. But when you get into that kind of era, into that kind of phase where you've been around since, I've seen you since you were 18. So in my mind, I'm thinking you were good when you was really young. So I expected you to just go to the moon kind of thing. But then you don't. And then, but that's normal. For footballer, that's normal. You got, like, unless you're Messi, Ronaldo, it's very rare that you start off really well and then your whole career is just seamless. Again, Xavi, Iniesta, even those guys, Iniesta sitting on the bench for time when he first started coming through until he started becoming who he was, kind of thing. So really Xavi, I guess, who kind of started really well and just kind of ended, in that, same kind of vein. But, De Jong, it's not going to happen. Most footballers, majority of footballers, yeah, bro, you're going to be, listen, you're going to have maybe a few years, and it might be, and it really was for him. It was about 3 years where I was like, yeah, I'm not really feeling De Jong. Don't really know what he's kind of bringing. And then when Donny van den Beek, because I thought he was class as well, when Donny van den Beek moved to Manchester United, I said, yeah, nah, it's it can't be like this. This whole Ajax thing was a fugazi thing. De Ligt, moving around to 100 different clubs since leaving Ajax. Who was, as I said, Donny van den Beek and then De Jong. They all kind of moved at the same time, or give or take the same time. And I thought, yeah, this thing ain't really real. But now I'm really seeing the quality, of him, and I just think that, yeah, he deserves his flowers, man. He deserves his flowers. But like I said, let me know what you think about, Frenkie de Jong. How highly do you rate him? Where does he rank in midfielders? And I'm talking all midfielders. So if you have to put DMs, attacking midfield, whatever, where do you rank Frenkie de Jong in the list of midfielders in Europe? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, peeps. And I'll catch you guys real soon, man. Peace.